Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Waterhouse. I'm director of the Robert Mondavi Institute. Yes, I know about the microphone. Don't worry about that. It's my privilege to welcome you. Can you hear me now? To the Walt Klenz Wine Business Speakers Series, featuring author, physician, and winemaker Laura Catena. This is the 18th event since 2006 when Walt Klenz himself gave the lecture. Thank you for coming. The Robert Mondavi Institute was created to provide a forum for the public exchange of ideas in the disciplines of food and wine. And it is the home of the Department of Viticulture and Enology and Food Science and Technology. Both those departments are global leaders in their respective fields, and I suppose I don't have to remind you that the College of Agriculture here at UC Davis is the #1 agriculture school in the world. As a public university, we pursue a mission of excellence in education and research across the full range of disciplines and professions for the benefit of California and the world. Part of our mandate is to disseminate that information to the public by talks such as this and conversations with experts, researchers, innovators, and leaders such as you'll hear tonight. At the RMI, it is our mission to enhance public understanding of wine, brewing, and food sciences. We have a couple of other lecture series I'd like to let you know about. We have Forum, which is an RMI series on food and wine sciences, which we started this year. The first presentation was by Maria Marco on fermented foods. The second was a winemaker's perspective on genetic diversity by Elizabeth Forrestel and winemaker Steve Mathiasen. We've also organized a second series of lectures called Savor, which is organized with the UC Davis Library. And our first presentation was back in February, was on the topic of food waste reduction. It featured Ed Spang from Food Science and Technology and Congresswoman Shelley Pingree from Maine, who has an interest in food waste. She started the bipartisan caucus in the House on food waste reduction. On Monday, we'll have the second lecture in the Savor series, and it'll feature Dr. Anita Oberholster, who will speak about smoke taint in wines, and former Governor Jerry Brown, who will speak about climate change and the effect on agriculture. Unfortunately, that event is sold out. But what I wanted to point out to you is that after tonight's lecture, you will get an email from us. And we'll ask you a couple things. We'll ask you to fill out a survey, which I hope you'll follow through and do that. But also, if you're not signed up on our email list, you will be signed up actually by registering for this event. And if you don't want to get those annoying emails, then you can opt out. But if you want to get those annoying emails and hear about our next speaker series next year, then please don't opt out. So that by getting on that list, you will hear about our future events on this series and the other series as well. And I'm sure we'll have a very exciting list of speakers next year, and you won't want to miss those. All right. So our speaker will be introduced by Walt Klenz, but I wanted to mention a few things about Walt. Walt Klenz got his bachelor's and MBA from Tulane University, and I noticed that he got his MBA just 1 year after his bachelor's. So I was rather amazed by that. He retired as CEO of Behringer Blass, which is a wine company, back in 2005, but remains in wine business today. He has his hands in several different companies. Most recently, he was vice chairman of the Winkler Group, wine investment holding company. He's also past president of Napa Valley Vintners and a past chairman of the Wine Institute. So Walt's going to introduce tonight's speaker, and please join me in welcoming Walt to give that introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, very much for those kind words. And wow, what a wonderful turnout. Thank you all for coming here. It's really nice to be back and take a minute to thank Andy and also obviously the Robert Mondavi Institute, who have been so helpful in putting these lectures together for all these many years. I really appreciate it. And it's my really very special pleasure to introduce Laura Catena, who's this evening's speaker, because I think she's the first one who's sort of a UC person. She is on the advisory board of the Department of Viticulture and Enology. So I guess I can't welcome you here, but it's nice to have someone associated with the university be able to give this talk today. Laura's day job, I guess, is as the managing director of the Laura Zapata Winery. The Catena Zapata Winery in Mendoza, Argentina, where she has built that business at winery into a very, very successful, probably the leading Argentine winery in terms of quality and image, and certainly one of the most award-winning wineries in Argentina, if not the world. From education, she is Harvard and Stanford trained, educated as both a biologist and as a physician. So she has many irons in the fire in her life that I'm sure she'll talk about a little bit today. Her biggest impact, I think, on the industry beyond managing a very, very successful winery is what she's done for her industry in Argentina. She is clearly the key spokesperson for the Argentine wine industry around the world, and is very active in promoting the success and the exports of Argentine wine. She's a great believer in the Malbec variety, and obviously the success of Argentine exports over the last 20 years has been extraordinary, led by Malbec. But also, very importantly, I think she's been a leader in promoting to her own industry the need to improve quality and be able to raise price points to get more into the premium position, and that's something I think those of us who follow the industry are seeing here today in the U.S. and around the world, is that the price point of Argentine wines are going up, and the quality certainly is going up as well. She is in her role as a spokesperson for the industry. She's been featured in virtually every major business publication or wine industry publication everywhere in the world, and has been a real force for the growth and success of her business. She's also an author of 2 books on wine, so she's very active and very successful across a wide variety of fronts. Currently, she splits her time between Mendoza, in the wine industry or the wine country in Argentina, and here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, where she lives with her family part of the time. And very interestingly, somehow she finds time for a part-time practice in emergency medicine at UC San Francisco. So. An extraordinary life across so many different disciplines that she brings to this talk today. So it's my I should introduce the topic: science to preserve nature and culture. I actually had science to preserve the ancient art of winemaking, but I guess that's one and the same. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our very special speaker this evening, Laura Catena.
Thank you, Walt. I think I'm using the mic that's in my pocket. Is that right? Yes. So I give this one to you. Okay, buenas tardes. I have carefully infiltrated the room with a couple of Argentinians. So don't say anything bad about the wines, because they're there amongst you. You know who you are. So what does wine have to do with art? This is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. For 500 years, people tried to restore this painting by putting glosses on it, by repainting. And what scientists and restoration people, our scientists, figured out over the last 3 decades is that the way to preserve this painting was to actually remove all the things that have been put over it for 500 years and keep the temperature under control, keep the humidity under control, keep the CO2 under control. And so they had to spend decades clearing out what previous restorers had done. And I actually think that wine, a special wine that comes from a special place, is not different from a piece of art. You need to preserve it, and in order to preserve it, you need to understand the science of how that beautiful piece of art came about. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my family's story of what we've done in Argentina, but I hope to convince you of this concept that wine is art, and that in order to preserve wine, we need to use science. So this is my friend Piero Incisa de la Roqueta. He's Italian. You'll see I mention a lot of Italians because being an Italian descendant, I have a thing for Italy. My husband's American, but he's jealous of Italian men, appropriately. So this is Piero Incisa, a dear friend, who went to Argentina to start a project called Chacra, making Pinot Noir in Patagonia. He's been very successful. And one time I was talking to Piero, and I asked him, hey, Piero, why did you come to Argentina? You know, you belong to the Sassicaia family, possibly, you know, the most famous wine in Italy. And he said, I wanted to go to Argentina to experiment, to find something new. Because in Italy, at Sassicaia, we're in the business of preserving. We're not trying to change anything. And I said to myself, wait a second. I'm okay with being the country that people come to discover and experiment. But maybe since we've been making wine since the 16th century, we also have something that's worth preserving, something like Sassicaia. Last year, we received the first 100 points for a South American wine from Robert Parker's The Wine Advocate. And Robert Parker recently retired, but his ratings are still probably the most powerful in the world in terms of commanding prestige and price for wine. So we have our piece of art. And I'm going to tell you today how we discovered this place, the Adriana Vineyard, where this wine comes from, and how we use science to discover, and what we're going to do looking forward in order to be able to preserve it. And I can tell you that 25 years ago, when I went to my first Parker tasting with my dad, we were terrified. I could not have imagined this moment that I would actually have a slide like this with 100 points. Impossible. I didn't think this was actually possible. So this is my great-grandfather, Nicola Catena, and his wife, Ana Moschetta. They came from Le Marque to Argentina. Nicola came to Argentina when he was 18 years old with a little suitcase and a few lira. And his dream was to make wine in Argentina and raise a family. And why were there Italians and Spaniards coming to Argentina? Because at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, there was a huge immigration to Argentina, not too different from the immigration that you had to the US, except that in Argentina it was even more massive. At the time of independence in Argentina, there were 500,000 people. 6 million Europeans, mostly Italian and Spanish, came to Argentina. And what did these Europeans need? Wine. Very good. So my great-grandfather saw this opportunity, and he took the boat to Argentina, and met Anna Moschetta, who was from the same village in Italy, and they planted their first vineyard in 1902. So this little boy over here is my father, Laura Catena. He's there with his sister and little brother. He lived in a town called La Libertad, which means freedom, a little town of probably less than 500 people. And the question is, how does a little boy from a town of less than 500 one day make a 100-point wine? So the answer starts with his mother, my grandmother, Angelica Zapata. So Angelica Zapata was the headmaster of the local school. It was a tiny school with less than 100 students. Here she is surrounded by her students. But Angelica Zapata believed that the secret to a country's success in the world was 100% related to education, that everybody had the right to an education. And she instilled this in my father and his siblings. And although she died tragically in a car accident when my father was 18, so I didn't actually meet her, before her death, my father went to her to ask her what he should do with his life. And he had a passion for physics. And she said to him, "I hope you're not going to go make wine with your father." I think a degree in physics would allow you to aspire to someday earning the Nobel Prize. My father never studied physics. He actually went to Columbia and has a PhD in economics. But I think what he has done for Argentine wine, maybe, is in the category of a Nobel Prize. And I think a lot of that had to do with his upbringing and with his mother. And today, in her honor, in Angelica Zapata's honor, we have a wine called Angelica Zapata. And when my father wants to criticize me, he actually says, well, somebody had to turn out like my mother. So apparently, Angelica Zapata was a little tough. I hope I'm a little nicer than her, but she was mighty. So now, to a place that you know well. I also have Robert Mondavi to thank for. We do, in Argentina. And I want to thank him for all the buildings he's donated to this university. He's a great man. But his impact was wide in the world of wine, including what he did for Argentina, but in a very simple way. When I was a teenager in Argentina, there was a military government. You might know about this. Many people left Argentina. There were kidnappings. There was 1,000% inflation. I don't recommend a military government. There were the Falklands War when we left, where hundreds of innocent young men died because of this completely ridiculous war. And so we left Argentina because my uncle had been kidnapped, and my father had had to negotiate his release. And he was very worried for the safety of our family. So we decided to come to Berkeley, where my father was invited as a visiting scholar. And I have my dear friend, I'm sorry, I always do this, whose father passed, who hosted us when we came to Berkeley. Thank you, Maria Inés, and your family. I'm sorry, I get like this with beautiful people. So when we were in Berkeley, I finished my high school there. And my father and my mother, with my little baby sister in tow, visited Napa Valley. And my father met Robert Mondavi. And he was shocked, because this man, Robert Mondavi, had decided to challenge the French. And my father had been told by his grandfather, listen, we can make all the wine we want in Argentina, but don't ever try to challenge the French. They have something that we will never have. But this man, Robert Mondavi, said different. And this Judgment of Paris said different, where the Californian wines won with French judges against the best French wines. And it was organized by my friend right here, Stephen Spurrier, who is still a force in the world of wine. So I forgot to announce this, but there will be opportunities to win prizes throughout the talk. So, and I'm not going to give them all to the Argentinians, I promise. So I will be asking a few questions throughout the talk, and whoever guesses, but it's going to have to be real quick. In case there's two guessers, I might have an extra prize. So the first question, and remember, answer quickly. If you answer wrong, don't worry about it. but otherwise you might lose your opportunity. So this is the copy of my first book, Vino Argentino, about Argentine wine. When was the Judgment of Paris?
1976.
Okay, over there.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe you can pass it back. Sorry, guys, it's all about speed. Okay.
Stephen's son and mine too.
Very. Oh, excellent, excellent. So, what did my father say to himself? If the Californians can do it, why not me in Argentina? So, back to Laura Catena. Why am I here today with you? Actually, when I went to college and medical school, my goal was to do something where I would help people. And honestly, I didn't see how I could help people with wine. I thought doctors, nurses, teachers help people. But wine or business, I thought was not very helpful. I was not interested at all in making money. Now I'm very interested in making money because I have to pay salaries and plant vineyards, and it costs a lot of money to do those things. So I decided I would not go work with my father. I thought I would spend my life drinking the family's wines, not making them. But when I went to work with my father, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this happened, I realized that actually what Catena, what our winery has done for Argentina, what my father has done for Argentina, has changed so many lives that actually when you run a responsible business, you can change as many lives or potentially more than when you're a doctor or nurse or one of the classically nurturing professions. If you had been to Mendoza 30, 40 years ago, you would have seen so much poverty. The houses weren't painted. Nobody had flowers in the gardens. Now you go to Mendoza. Mendoza is thriving. Everything looks beautiful. People have jobs. The hospitals are better. Everything's better. And a lot of this has been related to wine. So I am deeply convinced that the work that we're doing with wine is as or more important that my daily life as a doctor. But if you have any medical questions, I'd be glad to answer, because medicine is also a beautiful thing. So here, I was when I was teaching at UCSF. I'm actually working in pediatric emergency medicine right now, but I taught for 20 years at UCSF. So this was the moment that got me into wine. On the left, we were invited to go to the New York Wine Experience. Who's been to the New York Wine Experience? Okay, so several of you. It's this very prestigious event where Wine Spectator invites some of the top wineries in the world to present their wines. And this was the first time, it was 1995, that a South American winery had been invited. And so my father calls me in the US. I just finished my residency. I was working as an emergency doctor. And he said, Laurita, that's what he calls me. We've been invited to this thing. Nobody here speaks English well. You have to go. And I knew quite a bit about wine. I traveled with my dad visiting wineries. And I said, of course, if you need me, I'll go. And I went to the New York Wine Experience, and I was standing on my little booth. And people were just walking by, reading Mendoza, Argentina, and walking on. And I even had somebody taste the wine next to me and spit in my spittoon. Don't ever do that. And there were long lines with the California wineries, the French wineries, the Italian wineries, and I had the little trickle of people coming by my booth. And I got on the phone with my father the next day. I just actually had my first job in emergency medicine. I said, Dad, I'm going to keep on being a doctor, but I need to come work with you. Because what you're trying to do, which is to elevate Argentine wine, to put Argentine wine on the map, is very difficult. And for the first time in my life, I realized my father actually needed my help. There's a moment where children see that, and it happens to everybody. And that's when it happened to me. And also my country needed me. And really, that was the main motivator for starting to work with my dad. And this is a picture from actually last year, and David and Karen were there, where I was actually invited as one of the 10 wine stars. Wine Spectator at the event has 10 wine stars that come as speakers. And so I went from being the least attended stand to being a speaker. And again, had you told me that this would happen, I would have refused to believe you, back then in 1995, which is not that long ago. That's not that long ago, or at least that's what I hope to think. So now on to France. And are any French people here? Okay, good. We need a French person to keep me under control, because I love France, but it's kind of fun to play with the French. Are you okay with it? You're fine. Okay, good. So this gentleman here is Jacques Lurton. He belongs to a very prominent French family. They have like head winemakers in every chateau. They're very important in Bordeaux. And when I was still thinking I'm going to be a doctor, I was in medical school. I think I was about 18, 19 years old. My father invited me to go to France as his translator. And when I was studying biology, I had almost been able to minor in French because I loved French art and literature, not the wine because I was too young to drink. And I had studied French, and people had said to me, why are you learning French? What a useless thing. When are you ever going to speak French? But, it came in handy on this trip, and also you'll see how it came handy a few other times. So for the students here, study useless things, because you never know when that useless thing is going to come in handy. That's, if I can give you one piece of advice, is any kind of study is good. Learning new things is very important. So we went to see Jacques Lurton, and I remember we were sitting at Chateau Bonnet, and we had brought a bottle from one of the traditional areas in Argentina, Cabernet Sauvignon. And we poured it, and Jacques, tastes the wine, and he says, Dr. Catena, this tastes like a very nice Cabernet Sauvignon from the Languedoc. So I think Languedoc, sounds good, sounds French. My father, serious. We get back to the hotel. Laurita, this is the worst insult. If a person from Bordeaux says your wine tastes like Languedoc, it means it can't age, it's not interesting, it's from a warm climate. And this meeting with Jacques Lurton really changed my father's mind, because up to that point, he had thought that a lot of the improvements had to do with technology, with temperature control, with nice French oak barrels, with the fancy German presses. But actually what he realized was that unless he could find a place where he could grow grapes of high concentration and good elegance and good flavor, he would not be able to make these great wines that he was aspiring to. So I've been to Jacques' wedding, he's been to mine, and every time I see him, he says, Laura, please stop telling that story. But I always go back to him and say, you changed the history of Argentine wine by being direct and telling the truth. So if there's another thing I've learned from Jacques Lurton and in many other walks of life is it's good to be honest. And if you say the truth with respect and love, it's important, because you might change somebody's life by telling them the truth. And by withholding it, you're not doing them any favors. So after the New York wine experience in 1995, when I went back to Argentina, I said to my father, the only thing I know how to do is science. And, I toured a few of the vineyard experiments, and I quickly realized that the research that was being done was, very poorly controlled and not very, what I called, scientific. Now I've kind of gone full circle, and I was actually just talking to the students today about how sometimes in viticulture, you try something, if it works, you repeat it. You don't always have to know why it worked. But at that time, I was a serious researcher, and I wanted all our science to be well-controlled and well done. And in general, you should do well-controlled science, but I think in winemaking, some experimentation is also very necessary, and it's practiced by most wineries around the world. So when I went back and I founded the Catena Institute, which was basically a research department within our winery, and the goal was mostly to elevate Argentine wine, to make a 100-point wine. That was really the single goal. The vision of science to preserve nature and culture is a later goal, and I'm going to tell you how I arrived at that. And Roger, you recognize Roy there. Yeah, Roy is actually the head of winemaking for the Institute, and this is a picture from about 10 years ago. So after the conversation with Jacques Lurton, my father went back to Argentina, and he said to his team, I want to find the coldest place where we can make wines in Mendoza. And so, everybody went west, where it was higher in altitude, and south, where it was not as high, but cooler. And we found this place in Gualtajari, in the western part of Tupungato, where our head viticulturalist said to my dad, you are not going to ripen grapes here. maybe whites. There's no way you can ripen a red grape. But my dad thought, we have more sun than in other regions. We have a longer, harvest season. Maybe it will work. And I need to try, because if not, I'll never know. And so he planted the Adriana vineyard. And now for the question, what's the elevation of the Adriana vineyard? You can guess.
2,000.
Okay, feet or meters?
Meters.
2,000 meters?
3,000. 3,000 feet. 5,000 meters. 1,500.
Okay, you have to say that whether it's meters or feet, guys.
3,000 feet.
Okay, somebody said 1,500 meters. Okay, that's the winner. Did you say 1,500 meters before? No, okay. We got our winner. So it's almost 5,000 feet elevation. You were pretty close. So we got to give our friend back there. You can also get the book on Amazon, and it's been out for a while, so you can probably buy it for $1. So don't worry if you don't get it. So we found this beautiful place, Adriana, and I always ask my dad, I say, wow, that was lucky. And he says, yeah, we just lucked out. And we always have this debate about, what's more important, luck or hard work. And my dad, in his older age, says he thinks it's luck. And really, we could have planted anywhere, but we happened to plant in this place. Although what I always say is that only families have the patience to try for 100 years to plant in a new place, then in another one, until they find this kind of a place. But we did get lucky with the Adriana vineyard. So this is just to show you a little bit of the Winkler classification for the regions of Mendoza. And this Winkler, what is it called? The Winkler degree days, the calculation was actually developed at UC Davis. And what it allows you to do is to characterize regions by heat summation. And it allows you to know, do you want to plant Chardonnay there? Do you want to plant Cabernet Sauvignon? What are the varieties that you want to plant? Because they're the varieties that are going to ripen, at the right time with the appropriate kind of alcohol and acidity. So in Argentina, from Lulunta, which is a region in the place where that famous Cabernet Sauvignon came from, the Languedoc one, is warm. So it's like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. What's the equivalent California region? Paso Robles? Okay. And then you can go in about a 45-minute drive all the way to the higher parts of Guadalajara, which are closer to Burgundy and Champagne. So what's interesting about that is that in each one of these regions, we can get completely different flavors for wine. For Malbec, we've done a lot of research that I'll tell you about. But we can also make some really interesting blends, because we can blend some of the warmer climate fruit, which has riper flavors, less acidity, with some higher acidity grapes that have more minerality. And when you blend these, you get some really interesting wines, always with the smooth tannins that are characteristic of Argentine wine, which I don't know exactly where that comes from, but maybe you could give me some ideas. So now to Malbec. So most of you, if you're here at this lecture, you've heard of Malbec, and you've drank Malbec. And you most likely think of it as an Argentine thing. However, Malbec is a French grape, and it's very old. It dates back to Roman times. And when my father first started his project of making this, 100-point wine, he thought he was going to do it with Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay, because that's what Robert Mondavi was doing. That's what people were doing all over the world. That's what they were doing in Australia, although, then they also started with Shiraz. And he wasn't sure that he could make such a wine with Malbec. And we had all these fine winemakers come to Argentina, and some believed in Malbec, but most did not, until Attilio Pagli came. Attilio Pagli had worked at Antinori, and he had worked a lot with Sangiovese. And the first thing he told my father is, your Sangiovese sucks, basically. It's really bad. Don't do Sangiovese, because my father, being of Italian descent, had actually gotten kind of excited about Sangiovese. He said, forget about your Sangiovese. And my father asked him to go taste grapes in all our vineyards. And he came back after tasting the Malbec Massal selection at Lot 18 in the Lulunta vineyard, which is, as you saw in the chart, a fairly warm region. And he said, I think you have something special here. And the vineyard was not well cared for. We were not farming this vineyard for quality. Now, the interesting thing about Malbec is that we couldn't go to NTAV or FPS and buy the best clones or cuttings of Malbec because all they had was a few selections of Côte. They didn't have what we had in Argentina. We could buy the best selections of Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, which we did and we brought to Argentina. But with Malbec, we realized that we had to do our own selection. So we went to the lot 18 of the Angelica vineyard. It's named after my grandmother. And we selected 135 different plants, which appeared to have, the best flavors, small bunches, small berries, relatively low yields, because we had realized that usually somewhat lower yielding plants produced better wine for us with the Malbec variety. But then I became obsessed with another thing, which was, why did the French get rid of Malbec? Because, Malbec almost became extinct in France. And so that's where the French came in handy again. And so this is actually a great thing about France. There's a lot of great things about France. But they actually reprint old books in a modern version that you can buy on eBay for $10. Seriously. If you want to do historical research on France, you don't even have to go to France. You can get all the books on eBay. And so I started reading all these books to try to understand why had they discarded Malbec. And what I found first, and this was actually in the Encyclopedia Britannica, is that Malbec was the most widely planted variety in the Médoc in the 19th century. It's from the 1879 Encyclopedia Britannica. And then in the other texts, I found some people who liked Malbec, some who didn't. But what everybody said was, you need the Malbec for the smooth tannins, because the Cabernet is so tannic that you need to blend it with Malbec, and for some of the richness of flavor and the aromatics. And I even found a text that said, it's better to replace Malbec with Merlot because Malbec is too susceptible to cold. So Malbec is very susceptible to coulure and millérandage, which is when the berries don't flourish and you get yields way down. We've actually had that happen in Argentina in 2016, a very cool vintage. But in France, it was happening all the time. They had several cold years. And after phylloxera, they said, this grape is too difficult. We're going to replace it with Merlot that also has this softening effect. But Malbec had already gone to Argentina in the middle of the 19th century, where it had become widely planted. And nobody really knows why Malbec got so widely planted, because many other varieties came to Argentina. And my personal theory is that it just got widely planted because it did well and it made good wine. But honestly, I have read every textbook there is and every ancient book about Argentine wine, and it says nowhere why Malbec got so widely planted. It might have been luck, as my father would like to say. Now, the other thing that I was interested in was, why does Argentine Malbec taste, so aromatic and has such beautiful tannins, and so different from the wines that I drink from France, from Cahors? And I thought, maybe it's the climate, maybe it's the plant selection. And so we actually brought some Côte, which is the name that they give to Malbec in France. And what we found was that these selections of Côte were much more productive and had more rustic tannins than Brigger grapes. So my theory about that is that what remained in France had to be more productive because they were having so many problems with the lower yields in Malbec. And probably what we have in Argentina are these, Massal selections that were pre-phylloxeric. Because in Argentina, we have 135 cuttings at the Catena Institute planted that we study, but throughout Argentina, there's many more. So we, in a way, have become the old world for Malbec, because the diversity of Malbec has been preserved in Argentina and has been lost elsewhere. So now to Fernando Study. So we were talking about, in order to preserve something, you need to understand it. You need to know how to preserve it. So we thought, what do we know about Malbec? We knew about these cuttings. We knew that the selections were different than what was available in the rest of the world. But we didn't know what Malbec tasted like. Some people, I remember when I would go sell wine, would say, Malbec from Argentina tastes all the same. That would really piss me off. But then I had to have some proof, to tell them, no, it doesn't. And I could say, when I taste it, it tastes different in each region. But, I kind of asked myself the question, I should study this. And we had the fortune that Fernando Buscema, who is currently the director of the Institute, and he was actually the director of the Institute before when he was like 22 years old or something, came to study at UC Davis. And when he was at UC Davis, he met his mentor, Roger Bolton, who's here, and they came up with this idea for doing this study of the chemistry and the sensory analysis of Malbec across 26 regions in Mendoza and 16 in California. And I know it was a lot of work. Fernando would send me pictures in all the vineyards. And Roger, you went on a lot of the excursions to harvest and to find these grapes. And what they found was that the Malbec was reliably different from each region, and that there were big differences between the Malbec from California and the Malbec from Argentina. And one of the things that gives me great pleasure, and this is more of a pride thing, is what Roger said. And I'm going to read it. This is the first time that an extensive regionality study has been attempted for Malbec wines, and we venture to say the largest of its magnitude that has ever been undertaken for a single varietal across multiple countries and hemispheres. So the fact that the first study done of this nature was done with Argentine Malbec, just, I don't know, it makes me super proud. So thank you, Roger, for believing in Fernando and what we could do with you. Because, he could have thought, hey, these third world people, they're not going to do good research. And he didn't. So thank you, Roger, seriously. So now Roy Urbieta, who has actually learned sensory analysis with Professor Heinemann, who is a genius and who basically taught him how to do sensory analysis, is doing 45 different sites, and he's doing it over 3 years. So it's kind of the next level of the same study, and he's finding the same thing, extraordinary differences among regions. But the thing he's also finding is that vintage differences are huge. So now we have to kind of separate, the regional difference from the vintage difference, and that's, a whole other very complex topic. This is his heat map, which I love to look at this because this is Tunuyán, Tupungato, Luján de Cuyo, San Carlos, all the regions. And here's all the indicators, spicy, leather, plum, eucalyptus. And look at how different each region is. So, that person that once told me Malbec is the same everywhere, they were definitely wrong, and now I can prove it. And this is some of the differences between the traditional areas, a little more tobacco, herbaceous, and some of the cooler climate areas, more chocolate, citrus, spicy. This is a recent study that was published between our team and UC Davis looking at ageability. So after 5 years, these differences among regions remain. This is huge because now we know that Malbec actually can retain its character over time, over 5 years. Next we have to do the study over 20 years. Daniela Mezzatesta, another one of our PhD students, is studying soil. And with everything that people says about terroir, the taste of place, you'd think there'd be hundreds of studies. There aren't. There's not that many studies about what does the same plant selection in 2 different soils, same altitude, same everything, taste like. And she's studying prune weight, nutrients in the soil, root length, everything that she can study about these wines, including the sensory analysis, the chemistry. And what she's finding is that these 2 sites are one next to each other. They have very different soils, and the wines taste completely different. Now, some of it might be related to water retention. There's so many different variables. But what we can say is that the 2 sites give completely different flavors. And this is important for wine because it's important when you're trying to preserve something. What are you trying to preserve? We're studying the microbiome, and another thing that we found was that the microbiome in these 2 different soils are totally different. And I'm completely obsessed by the microbiome because I'm a doctor, and there's a lot of research going on about microbiome in humans and its role in immunity and weight and all kinds of diseases. And I think it applies to plants as well. And actually, Darío Cantú is researching that here. I'm going to actually skip to this because I'm getting a little... I think I should be done now, but 3 more minutes, Walt. So you heard the word PhD a lot, right? Institute, research. But when I went to my team, the viticultural team, we actually met everybody in our viticulture and winemaking. And I said, what are the biggest problems you're facing towards the future? They said, water shortage and people working the vineyards. And they said, we've talked to people over the world, in California and Australia and Europe, and they're having the same problem. And what I realized is we've been doing all this research with all these PhDs and education, and we'd forgotten about the people who are actually making the wine. And that's where the word science to preserve nature and culture came into our vision. Because if we want to preserve the culture of wine, we need to preserve the life of the countryside. And a lot of these kids, in the time of my father, would work with their parents in the vineyard. And it's good that we don't have child labor anymore. Seriously, because children should go to school. But they've lost that early contact with the vineyard where kids would fall in love with working alongside their parents in the vineyard, like my father. And so what we did is we started a program where high school students come and spend a day with us, harvesting, pruning, learning everything about the vineyard. And in Argentina, this is legal. I mean, I don't know, in the US, we were talking about this, maybe going to a winery would not be authorized. But you can take people to the vineyard. And most of these kids are finishing high school and moving to the city. And I don't know where life will be better for them, in the city or in the countryside. But I want them to be able to choose. I want them to have experienced life in the countryside so that if they want, they can choose to live in the countryside. And I'd be surprised after watching these kids and their enthusiasm that some of them wouldn't choose to continue the tradition of our region, which is to work in the vineyards and in the wineries. And this was organized by the Angelica Zapata Foundation. So a few other things that we're working on at the Institute. La Rioja, where there's more water sources. So we think we can make some great wine there. And this is a very poor region of Argentina. And we think we can bring the prosperity we brought to Mendoza to La Rioja through wine. We're working on Pinot Noir. And Bonarda, which is a European variety that does very well in Argentina that has not been well studied. And we think, especially with a Malbec blend, can do really well. This is just to acknowledge the universities we work with. We've done a lot more work at UC Davis than Bordeaux and Burgundy, but we're starting to work with them, and also CONICET, which is the Argentine Research Institute. And what I want to emphasize to anybody working in wine is that you have to collaborate with other institutions, because if we are going to save our planet, we need to get all the forces together. And wine is such an ancient art that the Europeans know a lot of things that the Argentinians don't, and the Californians know things that we don't, and the Europeans don't, so we need to collaborate. And we have found that people want to collaborate, and it's very exciting. This is, oh, you know what? I forgot one of the questions. Okay, so because I have to give the gift. Okay, so this is the book I wrote. You already know all about it. This is a label that we did because I kept on getting asked by people, what comes after Malbec in Argentina? And again, it would really annoy me. And I said, how can I tell the story of Malbec that's so interesting so that people care about Malbec and stop asking me what comes after Malbec? You know, what comes after a 2,000-year-old variety? Would you ask Aubert de Vilaine from Romanée-Conti what comes after Pinot Noir? My French guy over there. Would you ask him? No, right? No. So you wouldn't ask him. So why are you asking me about Malbec? So I thought, who do I know who can help me with this? And, you know, she was in my backyard. My little sister, Adriana, she has a PhD in history from Oxford, another PhD. And she said, instead of a lecture about Malbec, why don't you put it on the label? And I thought, well, she's pretty smart for, you know, being a historian, you know. So she came up also, she said, listen, most of history has been taught through the eyes of men. Let's make it about women. You have all these strong women. So now for another gift, and again, it's speed. Who is the third woman?
Your grandmother?
No? It's very obvious, guys. No? And it might be phylloxera. You said phylloxera? Yeah. Yep, it's phylloxera. So I kind of, okay, so you could say she's not a woman. Sorry, guys, she gets the best prize. It's much better to get a bottle. Wait, and you are 21, right? Okay, good. She already told me earlier she was 21. Otherwise, I would not have given it to her. No, you are 21, right?
No, I am.
Okay, good. No, because otherwise, no, I'm seriously, I respect these laws. It's very important. So, Phylloxera mostly exists in the female form. And that's part of why they couldn't destroy it, because they couldn't interrupt the reproductive cycle. To the academics here, is this legit, what I'm saying? This is what I read? Do you guys know? Yes? I don't know. You don't know? Okay. If Andy Walker says I'm saying a lie, but I did read this in a French book. Okay, so we came out with this label, and our friend here has the bottle. And this is the last book I wrote. And both books that I've written, I did not want to write. I was looking for somebody to write it, but I couldn't find anybody. And this book, I wanted a book to come out that would talk about some of the great vineyards in the world and how do they come about. You know, what is the story behind them? Because I didn't want to do a technical book, although there is some technical information. So it's an illustrated book. And actually, Stephen Spurrier, who, I mean, if you told me 25 years ago that Stephen Spurrier would be writing the back blurb on my book, I would have also told you were crazy. But this book has stories from 12 vineyards around the world. And now, for name 2 of the vineyards featured in the book. And Chateau what? You're in the right direction. Anybody else?
Robert Mondavi and
Petrus? What's that? Patagonia. No, it's okay. I'll give you a little more hints. I mean, she's kind of in the right direction, but there's a lot of France. But I mean, you can pick any 2. Just say famous wines. But you're not allowed to guess anymore because look at these greedy 21-year-olds. No, just kidding. Tokalon. Oh, I almost made it, but I chose another one. That could be debated. No. Anybody? What's that? No. So from California, guys, please don't be upset, but there's only one. What? I know. Kick me out. Okay, I'm going to do a different question, guys, and then I'm going to tell you the answer. So for this is the question that you get the book also. How many acres of Malbec are planted in Argentina? Just guess. Throw a number.
200.
200? 200,000? No, you're not allowed to guess anymore. Okay. 40,000 hectares. That's what?
200,000 hectares. 100,000. 10,000.
200 acres. Okay, so actually he's the closest. It's actually 90-something thousand acres. So yes. So you get the goal. So guys, for the names of the properties, I'm not going to delay this, but I'll have a book here on the table. You can find them. But there is actually Romanée Conti, but you said Rothschild Petit, and it was Rothschild Lafite. Those are 2 of the wines in there. So I think this is it. I'm actually going to just end here. Okay, guys, so we have, unfortunately, only 7 minutes for questions. I was very bad. I went over my time. Any questions? I think you guys want to keep on winning things.
Laura, I would like to know, what do you think is the best place to grow Bonarda?
Oh, Bonarda. So the best Bonarda right now comes from the east because there's a lot of old mines, and that's the warmer part of Argentina. And Bonarda ripens really late after Malbec. So, you know, it makes sense also that if you put it maybe somewhere really cool, it won't ripen. So currently that's where it does the best, but we're actually doing a selection of clones, which we're going to plant in several different areas, you know, to see if another area could work. But what's interesting about the east of Mendoza is that area has really suffered because the Uco Valley has gotten all the money and all the vineyards, and it's where the grapes are sold for the most money. And the east has really suffered from that, the warmer part. So if we could bring Bonarda to notoriety, we would actually not just make great wine, but also really help that region. We're working on that, but for some reason, nobody wants to buy Bonarda. It's really hard commercially. People like it when they drink it, but then it doesn't sell. You could change that. Any other questions? Yes.
So you raised an interesting question about wine being a craft, not just science. And I'm wondering, do you think your company's developed a style that's distinctive and different from your neighbors?
Oh, that's a very good question. So, this also goes back to the question of, is it the vineyard, is it the winemaker? So my dad always liked to say it's all the vineyard because he thinks it's inconvenient to say it's the winemaker because they could leave. I actually think he's got a point there. But I think that, for example, I'll tell you, everything that we've done is always based on some sort of ancestral knowledge. Like when we went to Gualtallarí and we went to the south, my dad was really scared to plant further south because his father told him that was the worst area for frost. So that's why he planted in Adriana in Gualtallarí, because his father said this is the worst frost area. And actually his father was right, but other parts of Gualtallarí where other people have planted get a ton of frost. So his father was right, but then my dad got lucky. So I think that in wine there's a lot of this sort of ancestral knowledge that develops through trial and error, through things that are handed down, by one person that trains another person, that are craft. And I think one winery or one company, whatever you want to call it, versus another one has different secrets that are just part of the culture. And, I think that is something that's individual to a property. And then you do have the individual taste of place. But I think then, which wine is more interesting or better, who knows? Walt, if you know the answer to that, tell me.
I wouldn't tell you, no.
You shouldn't.
A numbers question.
Yeah.
You hear about, and I mentioned it, that there is certainly a move to try to raise, the premiumness of wines from Argentina,
yeah,
especially on export. How much progress has been made in the last 5 or 10 years, and how close are you reasonably happy with the progress, or you think there's still a lot of opportunity? Yeah,
so I think one of the most interesting things my dad did when he started exporting wine in the 90s, actually the idea started in the 80s. Then he spent 10 years studying the climate, learning. We were actually making wine for several years and not exporting anything because we had a fairly solid domestic market. So my dad wanted to wait until, we were really ready to export these wines because he wanted to go at a high price point. And the first releases of Catena, Cabernet, and Chardonnay, which were 1991 and 1992, retailed for $18, which at that time was the price of the expensive California wines. And basically my mother, who runs another business, basically went to help my dad because my dad is not a super social guy. He doesn't like doing, big talks like this. And there's no way he could go store to store with his bottle. So, of course, my mother, who, Maria Inés knows my mother will do anything. I mean, she would stand on this table if necessary. She would actually go blind taste our Cabernet and our Chardonnay. She would go to a store and they would say, I'm not going to buy an Argentinian wine for $18. And she would say, well, what wine you have that's good, that costs $18? She would brown bag it. And she claims we always won. I don't know if that's true, but that's what she tells me. And so we started at a very high price point for our winery. And actually, my dad had been advised to go the Chile way, because at that time, Chile was winning at the super low end. It was like $3 to $4 to $5 wines. And my dad said, I'm not going to do that. There's no point in that. I want to do the Mondavi thing. And so he started at these high price points. And I think because we did so well, that really opened the door for other Argentine wineries. So for a long time, exports from Argentina actually exceeded exports from Chile in 2010. And the category over $15 has always been stronger for Argentina than for Chile. Now, we don't sell, we sell a lot less wine over $40 than France, let's say, or than Napa. But the higher price points are gradually growing. So, and we've actually started selling 2 of our wines through the Negociant network in Europe and Asia this year. So I think that the prestige of Argentine wines will increase, but it's not a 1 or 2 year thing. It's but I'm patient. As I told my husband, don't have any fantasies of American style retirement, because I'll probably die giving a lecture like this. They probably won't invite me though. Yes.
I can't wait any longer. What is the vineyard from California that is one of the 10 top vineyards?
Oh, so I put the Harlan Vineyard.
Harlan.
Yes, yes. Because my book, I know I should have done Tocalón, but the problem with Tocalón was that the book is about the family that owns the vineyard, and Tocalón is owned by several different people.
Yes, it is.
So I could have picked Tocalón. It was the runner-up.
Your choice.
It was my
I thought
choice,
you
yeah.
were going to say Beaulieu based on Chelachev's.
That would have been a good one too. I know the Harlan story very well because
Well, yeah.
I know him. I mean, one of the things for the book was that I picked wines that I liked, and that I thought that it kind of changed history, and I think the Harlan wine and the Harlan vineyard has, and that I knew the story and that the story was interesting. So there's a little bit of bias towards the story. When I had to pick between 2 or 3, that's how I picked. But I think Tocalón was my original choice, but it was too complicated. Yeah, but thank you for the question.
You don't want to get sued. There's a lot of
No, there was that too. Like, then I get sued by 3 people instead of just 1. Yeah.
All right. So it looks like
Okay.
we've gone through the questions. So let's thank Laura.
Thank you.
Well, where can you buy your wine?
Actually, you can buy my wine in a lot of places. And actually, if they don't sell it where you buy wine, just go demand it. That would help me. But I mean, we sell our wines in fine wine stores, but we actually sell some wines in Safeway, Costco. So yeah, probably like a wine like this one with the fancy label. Here, I just want to show you don't worry, I'm going to give it back. But I need to card you first. Okay, so this wine you wouldn't. No, I'm totally kidding. I trust you. Oh, I thought she was looking for her ID. So that wine you'd have to go ask for it. We only make a couple hundred cases. But the Catena Clásico, which you were drinking as you came in, that's fairly widely available. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.